Dr. Courtney Davis is a coach, a speaker, a teacher, an organizational consultant, a faculty member, an author, a wife, and a mom. And she's particularly dear to us at CFWA because she has also served faithfully on our board. And so we're really grateful to have you, Courtney, come and lead our panel discussion.
Morning. Morning. Good thing it's still morning that I'm still saying that. So really good to be with you. I'm Courtney Davis, and I'm pleased to sit up on this stage. So let me introduce a couple of new faces that are up here. You all have gotten to meet Chip and Joanna, Magnolia Fixer-Uppers. Chip and Joanna. No.
Just pass the sledgehammer.
Oh, come on.
Not as wealthy,
funny.
I can assure you, not as wealthy.
That was funny. Okay, but besides Chip and Joanna, love to introduce Tiffany Ouyang. Tiffany joins us here at Los Angeles. A little bit about Tiffany. She grew up for sure thinking she was going to step into fashion. From a very young age, she knew she would step into fashion, and that was a really big deal because she had a lot of familial pressures, a family of engineers. And so to pursue fashion was a pretty significant move outside of what was expected of her. And that was a big deal. So she studied at the Fashion Institute in New York and stepped into fashion for 9 years, was a sweater designer and a trend forecaster, a product developer, and a buyer. And the really fun part about Tiffany and the ways that we've gotten to know each other a little bit is that actually mid-pandemic, a few years ago, she decided to move out of fashion and is now a quantitative research manager at MarketCast. And there will be some fun questions to entertain with Tiffany, thinking about what does it look like to have a calling from a very young age, to have lived that out for almost a decade, and then to actually make a career transition in her 30s. And how do we make sense of calling when these things have been deeply embedded in us from a very young age? So let's welcome Tiffany. And then sitting next to her is Dr. Tim Yee. And in 2021, just a few years ago, he finished his dissertation from Fuller Seminary using the Bible and a story-based assessment tool to help Christians discover their personal call. 2 years later, in 2023, Dr. Yee left the local church. He was a senior pastor for a church here in downtown LA called Union Church. And he left his 27-year career serving the local church to step into leading a team behind the True Center assessment. And some of you will have an opportunity to hear from Tim in a breakout session specifically about True Center. True Center is one of the first of many digital discipleship tools that is sponsored by Cherith Analytics and focuses on using technology to support faith initiatives. So would you all please welcome Dr. Tim Yee. So as we welcome Tim and Tiffany to the conversation, I'm going to start with Tiffany. With a focus on calling today, maybe you can share a little bit about the challenges you wrestled with. So I think about Chip's talk about the myths that we really still, across the life stage, really encounter. But what did the wrestling look like, probably early 2020, as you thought about making a significant career change? And what do you know now after having wrestled and made a career transition?
Sure, thanks for asking. I think there's a lot of pressure on myself growing up to pursue the calling, especially with familiar pressures not to. But I think, just 5 years ago, my outlook on calling was really, if I pursue God's calling, it'll be difficult at first, but the Lord will lead me to like some self-described promised land of everything will be great afterwards. And then Tiffany rides off into the sunset and just works happily ever after. I think that was COVID helped bring that down very humbly. And I think, throughout fashion, I noticed that thread of pearl, like the string of pearls, where essentially what I was doing was I was helping my company or customers understand the segment they were serving. And that seems to be the thread that pulls everything through. But what I had to wrestle with was I thought God was calling me into fashion as the calling. And I couldn't quite understand what would happen if I came out of fashion. Would I be coming out of my calling? Had I peaked? Is like God's calling the best for you in your 20s and it just goes downhill from there, or you just find something else? My mind goes there. I tend to, spiral. So, yeah. And I think during the pandemic, I just did that switch And it was very entrepreneurial. It felt very humbling in the sense that I just had to figure things out as I went. Going through imposter syndrome was very real. Showing up into a market research company that is actually very well known and being the only person who was like, this is my first year as a market researcher, was just very much something that I just had to wrestle with. And I think the Lord brought me to the point where he was teaching me that I should just lean into this constant change. There's no riding off into the sunset, but there is joy to be found in solving these problems and conquering these learning curves, and through that, helping the others around me thrive in their workplace, whatever kind of career path they may come from.
I appreciate that. Tim, you have 27 years of local ministry service, and when you hear Chip talk and Joanna talk, what would you double down on? What would you add to what was offered so far this morning?
Double down on Jesus. So I clearly heard that from both of them. They did a fantastic job. And I'd double down on relationships. I think they both used the word community. And I would say the most important thing you'll see throughout your entire life is just how the interweaving of relationships impact you in significant ways. And so it's mining the stories of your past, and the work I do, it's mining the best of your stories in order to create a future story that leans into the story that God is writing in you and through you. And so it's the relationships in every aspect, and that's in whether you're single or married, it's leaning into relationships to help you have healthier relationships. And work and calling, it's the relationships that form it. The thing I thought about just before I walked up, I was like, oh, I should have brought this one chart that I always use with my coaching clients. So I make my cheap version. So I spent, $80,000, $100,000 at Fuller Seminary. And this is like the first class I took, and this sums up what you should do with your life. And it's a relationship chart. And I learned this from Dr. Bobby Clinton. If you can get anything from Dr. Bobby Clinton, just Google him. Leadership 2.0, I think someone's continuing his work there. But I remember the class, and we just took like a sheet of paper, turned it sideways, and we made a big X on it. And on the top, we wrote upward, and the bottom, we wrote downward, and then we wrote internal and external on the sides. And all that meant was, you're in the center. Who is an upward mentor to you? You're in the center. Who are you pouring into? And then laterally, who are people in maybe your work or your life that are peer mentors? And who's external? Who's outside? Can give you a real third-party view on your life. I'll just tell you, you start writing down names of people in your life. I spend hours coaching people just on those relationships and looking for patterns of joy, patterns of blessing, and also stories of significance that are painful is when we kind of navigate those for the future. So relationships, relationships, relationships. With God first and with others, you will not be led astray from what Chip and Joanna were saying in terms of it's the community, so powerful.
Yeah, when we talk about community, it's gotten 6 upvotes. So one of the most popular questions we've got so far is talking about finding your calling. And I know, Joanna, you just talked about that calling is formed. And I think about communities of reference. And so how might we step into this question? And you can refine it as you like. If you're struggling to find your calling, how do you balance between trying to find it and making the best of where you are? And as you sort of refine the language around formation of calling instead of finding it. Maybe, Joanna, you might offer some words first, and then anyone else can jump in.
Yeah, I think what's freeing is it's a lifelong project, and that can be a little intimidating or discouraging because it's like, give me something more definite, Joanna. But we want to be entrepreneurial, press into those assessments. Get a coach who's talking to you about better understanding your leadership style or what you're good at. Explore all those opportunities. I think that's why that book, Designing Your Life, is helpful. I think it's actually helpful to know the context. Like Dave Evans said, they were working with all of these brilliant people at Stanford. Students that had gotten in and were geniuses had no clue on how to figure out what they wanted to do in life. They were like a below zero in their ability to navigate life outside of college. And so they created a method to help people think through envisioning different directions of their lives. It's like a very clear process you work that can be really helpful. And so take advantage of those things. God will lead you through the process of gaining outside tools.
Yeah, Chip, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that there's tons of tools, and the things that Tim uses are great. We do that too. There's data you can gather about yourself and you can gain clarity. I think that question, though, there's the word balance in there, and it's kind of like, how do you, that's probably that's the trick, right? Because you could spend all your time thinking of basically exploring being somewhere else than where you are every day in your job. And I wonder if things like create a container for that quest and just, I'm going to spend 5 hours a week on that. Because one of the things Oz didn't get into it, but in his book, The Call, which you should all check out, he talks about our first calling is to Jesus. That's our primary calling. And then we have these secondary callings, one of which is your work. But if you came from a family, so you have a calling to a family, I think we're called to our neighbors and our faith communities too. And so, like, realistically, given the callings of my life, how much time and capacity do I have to explore other possibilities? Because the work you're doing now, I mean, you can follow God's call for the kind of person that you're meant to be right where you are. So it's not either or, but it's just, sometimes it helps to say, I can allocate X amount of hours to this. I'm going to trust God to work in that container.
That was amazing. So you should get into executive coaching.
Yeah,
He is.
Because what he just did there, he took
you're touching my string of pearls there, brother.
What he just did is what we as coaches always are trying to do, is you take this amorphous amount of amazing content and make an action step. I mean, that's all we do, really. We listen, and then we prompt. And you did an amazing job right there. I would say go with that. Like, decide for the next 30 days to take just 5 hours a week to lean into calling. And when you put a number on it, it forces you to go, well, I'm going to do 4. I'm going to do 10. Well, great. Now you've decided to do something actionable in the next 30 days. I think honestly, amazing things would happen if you would do that. Take 5 hours every week for the next 4 weeks to focus on God and calling. I think amazing stuff will happen 30 days from now if you did that.
And I'm sure you guys see this too. Like, sometimes people go through a formal process, and we have one, we call it the Career Navigator, and they actually end up staying where they are. They just do it with a sense of, this is okay. Like, this is legit. This is where I'm supposed to be for now.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So if you do your month-long 5 hours a week plan and you end up staying where you are, that's not a failure. That's clarity, and that's what you need.
Okay, I'm going to ask the question that you're probably asking. What would you do for those 5 hours? Like, am I just praying? Like, am I just supposed to, right? If calling is not individual, then what could this look like? What are some things that you might recommend that they do? Certainly assessments, I would say community. What else would you add to that? How would you facilitate that 5 hours that they're going to allot?
I think feedback is so important. And it's beyond like your pals that just say, you're great, do whatever you want, you can be whatever you dream of. It's people that will really tell you honestly, when you do that, it's great. And when you do that, not so much. Like, you need feedback. One of the tools that we use in our process is we actually, everybody that goes through our program does a 360. You've probably had them at work, but this is your personal 360 from the people that you've worked with. So I don't know how you guys, it's probably played in your journeys. It's feedback along the way. It's humbling to ask for feedback, and it's scary, but it's such a critical piece of the data gathering, I think, that's part of that 5 hours a week.
Interview somebody. Oh, go ahead.
A practice I started doing just a few months ago was writing in my journal like everything that I did throughout the day, and then just kind of synthesizing at the end. So not necessarily 5 hours, not that intense, but probably just like 5 minutes, and then just like day over day. And then after the week ends, it's like, okay, what are the biggest recaps? What did I learn the most? What are the areas that I could improve? What were my biggest takeaways? How did I feel? And with my church, we have our weekly DNAs, which is just women. And that's kind of when I get to pour out all my feelings. And I think, although they're not necessarily in the workplace, they provide that outside perspective of like moms who are just here to care for their kids. And then like, they look at me and they're like, are you happy? Like, are you doing okay? They're able to see that versus me. I'm just like, oh no, I'm just in the grind. I'm just supposed to be doing this. So, I think for like practical ways, I don't necessarily spend 5 hours, but I think, I started using it, and month by month, you'll start to see like a trend. It's only been like month 4, month 5, and I've already seen like a trend of how I am and how the Lord has like formed me throughout those months, instead of just like once a year when you have your annual review that hits and you're like, what did I do? So
So cool. No, I'm done. You go.
Here's an idea, because these are great ideas. Something I've done with some of my coaching clients is, on this topic, is I have them take let's say a 30-day count. So take the month of May, have it all listed out. If you use Google Calendar, if you use a handwritten calendar, whatever it be, but have all the things that you're doing in the month of May listed there. The meetings you have, the fun things you're doing, whatever it be. And what I have them do, I said, now you get a green highlighter, mark everything in green that you're like excited about. When you think about doing that thing, you're like, I'm coming alive. Mark things in yellow that you're like, that's fine. Mark stuff in red where you're like, oh no, I gotta do that meeting again, or that's coming up. And then we start taking a look as we meet as how much green do they have in their life? How much red do they have in their life? We start looking for patterns of the things that are why is that green in their personal? Why is that green in their work life? Why is that red? Why is that yellow? And we start talking about how can we plan a calendar in the month of June that's a lot more green. Really easy conversations. Like, it's just natural, but it's hard to start thinking about how can I make that change? And you'll need the community around you in the 360. How can I make this happen in my work? How can I make this happen in my relationships to get more of that green? It's not a me-centered green. It's living into who God has made you to be. How can I live into that more and more? And that's why I generally say the green is how God has wired you. And we discover that sometimes through assessments, through people, but live into more of that green, because I think that's where God would love us to be. We'll be at our best. We'll be energized. We'll serve people better.
Michaela O'Donnell talks about identifying the next doable risk. So you don't have to make a big jump immediately. Start sniffing around. If you're beginning to suspect you might like doing something, find somebody who works in that role or that industry and ask them a lot of details about their work to figure out, is this something I really think I'd like? And then take small steps in that direction before you make a big jump. So she says, what is the next doable thing you could try to begin that experiment? I know a whole lot of unhappy lawyers. I don't know if anybody's a lawyer in the room. Sorry if you are, but
there might be a happy one out there.
yeah, there might be happy ones. A number of my friends are unhappy lawyers because they kind of had this vision of what the life as a lawyer would look like that wasn't realized when they were making those decisions as a young adult. They didn't actually understand what they were getting into, and that can be really hard. So take those small steps to be informed.
Okay, so that might actually answer two questions at the same time, but I just want to prompt them and then see what else comes out. So there's a question specifically about a mid-career and boredom. And so what do you do? And I think part of that probably is answered by the same question related to an entrepreneurial spirit. What does an entrepreneurial spirit look like apart from starting your own business? And so the entrepreneurialism, can you maybe define a little bit of that? And also, how does that relate to mid-career boredom or recognizing a career transition might be ahead, certainly taking the next doable risk? What might we contribute to that conversation?
Boredom's a scary thing because it can be temporary or it can be chronic. And I think this is where some of the reflective practices that we're already advocating, I think, Joanna, you talked about a little bit. My transition from pastoring to doing what I'm doing now took a long time. And there was just there was boredom and restlessness and guilt because you're not supposed to feel that when you're a pastor. It was years. It was a good 4 years of restlessness. And there was a lot of the kind of work that Tim does just making sure, and some coaching and therapy, just to make sure it wasn't something else, because there's a lot at stake in that move for me. So I went real slow. So I don't know, I just think that's, why are you bored? Is it often bored? Sometimes we find people, they have the same job title, but their job changed. Their company got purchased, or they were working in an office and now they're remote, or vice versa. And it's actually, that's where working with somebody, whether it's a coach or a good friend, can help you reflect on where is that coming from. So there's lots to pull the string, see what happens.
I bet you have something to say.
I always have plenty to say, so I want to defer. I would assume the Holy Spirit is making you attentive to that boredom. So don't see it as a non-spiritual thing. Well, if the Holy Spirit actually made you aware that I am bored. So we often will ignore it because I feel bad, I'm a Christian, or something like that. Like, no, what if the Holy Spirit shined a light on it? And he really wants you to lean into, why am I bored? Is this just selfishness? Am I wired for something more? who kind of explore the Swiss? So that's where, whether you do a very formal, wonderful workshop with Voka or me or Joanna, whatever it would be, or you just take that piece of paper and you start looking around, okay, who are the people in my life that I could take out for coffee and we'll have this conversation with me? That's the cheaper version than paying us, to be quite honest, because it's not cheap what we do. It's life-changing and valuable, but we got to find ways that every person can do this, right? Because that's what we care about is impact. So you can do this with a friend, take them out for coffee and have this conversation about, I'm bored, I'm not sure why, and I'm trying to understand how maybe there's something more out there, but pay attention to it. That might be from the Holy Spirit. Don't feel guilty about thinking about it. Explore it, pray about it, bring it to some friends.
Yeah, I would add, don't underestimate what a $6 cup of coffee can get you. And
Yeah.
so thinking about informational interviews and to reach out and to use the networks available to learn a little bit more about what it is that you think you might want to step into. Certainly $6 could, give you a lot more bang for your buck. Yeah, anything else you would want to
Well, I
add?
was going to let Tiffany, do you have anything to say? I don't want to.
Yeah, I think being bored could actually also be good and also better, because I feel like when you're bored, you can actually notice things that God might be putting in your path. When you're overstimulated, it is very easy to get caught up in those things and just go at it and just not see what God is actually trying to lead you to. I remember when I was a trend forecaster for 4 years, I think I got very bored of it actually in like the third or the fourth year. And I just started coming up with things. I started reaching out to people, seeing if they wanted to start a conference with me, seeing if they wanted to try a new project. And not all those things worked, but I mean, it actually got me, that was a trigger. My boredom was a trigger to get me into buying. And that was the start of my career path of being actually entrepreneurial and solving new problems, because I was so bored. And I think my brain just thirsted for it. And I think we all do.
Such a great example of how to do that, because it's taking initiative in the small things, like we said, the next doable risk, but that can play out in a few ways. I think of people that go through our fellows program in Denver, which is like the one you run here. They have to do a project as part of their job where they're thinking about ways that God could be working redemptively or making positive change where they are. And sometimes just approaching the work that you're doing in a fundamentally different way or trying some new things actually can get you promotions. It's crazy how many of our fellows through those projects capture the attention of their employers in new eyes. And so it may be approaching the work you're already doing in a different way, or experiment with some stuff. Like my friend Marie is currently working in healthcare. She does intensive vascular procedures where she puts in ports for people that need to have like chemo and stuff like that. And she's seeing the increasing pressure of number of patients that she has to treat every day to meet the business requirements at the hospital. She's seeing that and saying, I'm reaching the point where I don't feel like I'm providing safe safe patient care anymore. One of my friends calls it moral injury. If you work in healthcare, like it's reaching that point for Marie. So she's taking a community college design class. She goes, I'm thinking about completely shifting industries. But before she makes that jump, and she's younger in her career, she's experimenting with some things. And we can all choose to do that.
Certainly, we're at a faith and work conference, and so we talk about calling oftentimes related to our compensated work. And so there's a question here about how do we balance kind of your work calling and financial stability with other callings, such as marriage, wanting to start a family. How might you what might you offer here when we talk about maybe multiple callings, or is there the string of pearls through all of your vocational stations? What would you say here?
Come to my breakout. That's a big question.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, sorry. No, but we got to
Another
talk about
breakout
that.
leader.
Women need to talk about that, so yeah.
Nobody wants to touch that one?
Well, I mean, I think that balance is this elusive thing. It's not, you never stay there. It's like you're always moving towards it or away from it. And so I'm an empty nester. I have three girls in their 20s, one who lives in Torrance, by the way, so I'm out here from time to time. And we just became grandparents in November. So it's like we're entering a new season that changes everything, changes the way my wife especially is thinking about her work. And I always feel like you realize that the rules have changed at least several months after they changed. You know, it's like there's a lag. So we always are adjusting. We're always kind of doing that. I mean, I think this has come up a lot today, that there's a countercultural dynamic of following God's call in your life, no matter what it is, no matter what industry you're in. And so, you could be in a world that values, career as a careerist world where you have to push against that on the family side. And there's also, there's the whole trad wife thing and all that other stuff like that might say, that's a whole nother thing. It's not very Proverbs 31, so it's like there's this nuance of, I think, being able to hear God's voice, which isn't a great answer. It's like we're saying develop that capacity. It's a dynamic process, and that's kind of the way it works. And maybe don't over-index on balance too much because it's elusive.
It's really a juggling act.
Yeah.
Like, I had a friend who said, oftentimes we're just juggling a lot of balls. So my husband's here, and we've got 2 boys. One turns 11 next month and heads to middle school. Pray for us, please. Heading to middle school, and an 8-year-old. I'm a faculty member, a PhD. My husband owns his own business. Like, there's a lot of things that we're juggling. Lots of people are juggling lots of things. And I remember a friend said to me, like, just make sure you don't drop the same ball consistently. So sometimes you have to do a work event, and you can't go to flag football practice, but you can't choose that all the time. Right? And you can't choose your family all the time. That when kiddos having a hard time at school, you can't just not go to work all the time because your family, like drop a different ball. And somehow, the goal is not to keep them all up in the air, right? It's just that you get to hold some of them sometimes. And I'm grateful for a partner who's willing to juggle with me. And so that is, I think what you offered, just community of reference and whose approval do you seek? And so I'm grateful for a partner who says, like, hey, we're going to do this together, and this is the best way for you and me and our kids to glorify God. And I will always say that, like, I get to be here because my husband is like incredible and has led me really well in our marriage and our family. But it is that community of practice, and then we have friends outside of that. So yeah, there's pieces of balance is not what we're seeking. It is a righteous juggle of how do you do what is good and right in front of you at this moment to the glory of God and for the good of other people.
Should be the title of your book, your next one. The Righteous Juggle. That's good.
Okay.
A righteous juggle.
Can I come at it conceptually?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, one of the biggest things that I have gained in the faith and work conversation is that all of life matters to God. And so often, especially for women, especially Christian women, and anybody really, we've kind of implied, certain work is more important than others, or you can't care about your work as much as you care about God, or different things like that. And the reality is, like, we live with God every moment of the day. Every corner of creation has been redeemed by Jesus Christ and matters. And so it changes the conversation to one of stewardship and discipleship. So stewardship is asking, like, what's the wisest use of who I am in this place at this time? And it's not formulaic. It can vary by season. It can vary by life stage. And so you're just beginning to say, Lord, this all matters to you. I don't have to be afraid of doing it wrong, but I do want to be attentive to you and wise about how I'm caring for things that matter to you. And then discipleship is like, what's the inner work that has to happen for us to be faithful in those things? Because sometimes I think popular culture says for women and men that if you just learn how to hustle harder or balance it better, you can get whatever you want whenever you want it. And the reality is we can't. And so that's where the discipleship comes from. We may have to take bold moves in our career and step forward in courage and faith, or we may pull back and have to do the inner work of ego and loss and grief when life asks us to steward life differently. And both of those are part of living our call.
Yep. My friend Alan Fadling, who's a spiritual director, says something like this: what you can do well in anxiety, you can do better in peace.
I got to write that down. That's good.
I think I quoted him right. Buy his book. Shameless plug. And I think we're all saying, here's some action steps you can take. In the end, it's knowing you're a child of God. You're chosen before the creation of this world. He's made you in his image. You're an heir. You're in the covenant. You're a covenant people. God has made you and wired you for some amazing things. Whether or not this planet Earth will ever recognize your greatness, the Father knows. And you live out of that, and the rest is overflow. Let the Holy Spirit fill your cup, and you're just spilling over into the world, into relationships, as a single person, as a married person, as a parent, as an employee, as a boss, as an entrepreneur, as an artist, as a plumber. let it spill on over. And so it's taking the non-anxious path in a very anxious world.
There are like 85 more questions. And so let me say to you, I don't mean to, not see it and offer it. We do have lunch, and I know that we are standing between us and lunch. And so I'm going to ask the last question, and then know that 3 out of the 4 up here have breakout sessions. Tiffany's around, I'm around, lots of conversation to be had over lunch. Let me ask you this question as we sort of finish. I think sometimes it's easy that when we're on a stage and have some articulation around calling, that we've got all this figured out, and we are living out our well-articulated callings with ease and joy, and we're successful at it, and all of this is awesome. That's not true for me. I don't think I'm alone. Would you offer here, as kind of my final question, what are the questions you are asking and working through in this season? And I'll go first, because I knew that was the question I was going to ask. I would tell you that I am thinking about what the next life stage looks like. And my husband and I have had lots of conversations. I'm a full professor. I am a coach, and I do all these things. And it is really hard. I think the question I'm trying to work out for me is I'm really good at what I do, and God has given me great gifts to do it. And is it only because I'm good at what I do in this season? Will that keep me from doing something that I'm not good at in another space? And that's a hard one. I think, in my 40s, I'm thinking a lot about what does the next half of my career look like? And am I willing to take risks out of places of comfort and of competence in order to step into something different for service's purpose? And so that's one of the questions I'm asking is, can I be faithful with what I'm good at? The answer is, I feel pretty good about that. Where am I willing to say yes to something that I don't feel confident about for the service of others and for the glory of God? Mm-hmm. What questions are you asking? What are you wrestling with in your own calling, work, life stage?
Should I be online dating?
I so appreciate that, Joanna.
Yeah, well, here's the deal. Is that I'm single. And I think the biggest challenge for me vocationally in the last big view of calling vocationally in the last decade has been, I moved through my 40s and I was way off the grid of what I thought a Christian woman's life should look like. That's part of what led me into women work and calling. But I also lost the ability to have kids for medical reasons. And so that's another way that I'm like way off the grid of anything I thought would be true of my life. And so even though work has brought new opportunities, like the cost for me personally has been really high. And the phenomenal, like soul-crushing grief that I experienced in my mid-40s as I realized some of the things I had longed for wouldn't be fulfilled in my life. I bring that up because I think some of you in this room are probably dealing with that. And so it's helpful to see that somebody else has walked that path and just acknowledges that. So whether it's singleness or infertility or just disappointment in life stage and calling, like that's really hard and it shapes how you show up at work. And so I think I'm at a spot where the Lord has been faithful to bring me through that after like a butt-kickingly hard decade of my 40s. But I'm also asking, like, God, I don't want to slow down and have lousy dates with guys that I meet online, but I still love to get married. And that's part of living life with God. That is an expression of my calling. That marriage could be part of that. So I can choose to make work an idol and pour myself into women work and calling, or I can show up with lousy coffee dates that I meet online. I have to trust the Lord with that.
So appreciate
you guys know you've been there. You've been there.
Can we just say we really appreciate Joanna? Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah.
For me, I just got married last year. I have been pretty heavy into my career to one point making my identity, but that's a past story.
Praise God.
Yeah. But I think the big question I have is what, as we're planning out our future and our family, a lot of my friends kind of like quit their jobs or like do a lot less of it once they have a kid. And I don't know what that looks like for me yet. I think, the same string of pearls theory of like, what will God take what I've learned in my career into potentially motherhood? I don't know. So, yeah.
Appreciate that.
All right. I'm wrestling with the question of how is my work forming me?
Yeah.
Like what kind of person is it making me? And there's some shifts that have happened in the last few years. So up through 2018, Voca was kind of just me. And we started to build a team. So that, I believe in team, but it changes it's more work in some ways to get the work done. So there's the team dynamic. There's a shift from, Voca's a nonprofit. We added a for-profit company that is in parallel with it. So now I think about profit. I always think about, do we have enough money to survive? But, so there's that piece is a shift. And the third shift is travel. And I would used to travel maybe 4 or 5 times a year, and now I'll go through spurts where I'm gone every other week.
Wow.
Not all week, but I travel a lot. I like it. My wife doesn't really like it. So there's this, and I'm just thinking about like, what kind of person is this making me? How's this forming me? So that's what I'm wrestling with.
I'm wrestling with what I do with coaching clients. We usually go through like 12 sessions. I mean, it generally are saying, where do you want to be in 5 years? Like, how do you see your life? And imagine your life is amazing. If it's amazingly better than now, what is that? And why? Why do you want that? Is that something that God wants for you? Is that something that you just want for yourself? But at one level, it's giving myself permission to imagine that, and then going through the hard work of realizing why right now isn't contentment. That's hard work to face. That's a grieving process too, to say whatever age you're at, that I'm not living that life. I have a lot of red on my calendar. It's red everywhere. Wow. There's no green. Those are the kinds of things that you have to face, in that. And so, but it is giving yourself permission to dream that God might have something even better for me, which is in turn going to be better for those I'm serving. That I'm more alive. I have more energy. I'm less mad. I'm less anxious. I'm less hurrying. I'm overflowing peace because He's pouring that in me and out to others. What does that look like 5 years from now? I'm working with some great people, whether there's friends or volunteer mentors or a paid coach to help you not only imagine it, but then take actual steps towards that. Be thinking, where do I want to be in 5 years that God is nudging me towards, and what is keeping me from doing something about it right now? And part of it is those informational interviews, I promise you, especially on career. It is those informational interviews. I would spend some of those 5 hours a week on that piece, talking with people.
Let me thank the four of you personally. This is a fun conversation. We have an audience here, but I would so enjoy continuing the conversations over lunch. Let me invite you to thank our panel.